I thought I had found the one. Brian and I had been together for 6 months, and I gave him my whole heart. I loved him deeply, completely. But lately, something felt off. Brian was always so easygoing, like nothing could ever really hold his focus, not even me. I trusted him, but sometimes trust feels like a gamble. I didn't know then that behind my back, he was meeting with his exes, going on dates like I didn't even exist. How could he say he loved me, yet give pieces of himself to someone else? To me, our love was everything. To him, I was just another moment in a long string of moments. One quiet afternoon, Brian sat across from her, an ex he swore was in his past. The cafe was nearly empty, their voices barely above a whisper. They laughed, shared stories, like two people with nothing to hide. But there was something unsettling about it all. As he leaned closer, his smile, the way he looked at her, like she still had a piece of his heart. In that moment, Brian wasn't thinking about me, or the promises he had made. He was lost in a memory, one he had chosen to relive. I didn't mean to see it. I was just passing by that quiet little cafe, the one Brian always said he hated. But then, there he was, sitting there, laughing, his eyes locked on hers. My heart stopped. I knew her face, I'd seen it before in the pictures he swore he'd deleted. His ex. I froze for a moment, unsure what to do. Then, instinct took over. I pulled my hoodie up, hiding my face as I walked past them. My heart was racing, my chest so tight I could barely breathe. He didn't see me. He didn't even look up. In that instant, I realized the truth. I was invisible to him, just like I'd been all along. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone. I didn't want to believe it, but I needed proof of what my heart already knew. I snapped a few photos, each one cutting deeper than the last. His smile, her laugh, it was like I didn't exist. Before the tears could fall, I turned away, clutching my phone like it held the weight of my broken heart. When I got home, the weight of it all finally hit me. I sat on my bed, staring at the photos until the tears blurred my vision. My heart ached, and my mind was a mess. How could he do this to me? How could he lie so easily? I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but I didn't know if I could. I needed clarity, someone to guide me. That's when I decided I'd talk to Grandpa tomorrow. He always knew what to say, always helped me find my way when I felt lost. But before I meet Grandpa, I have to see Brian, ask him and want to know what Brian will tell me. A few days later, I waited for Brian outside his apartment after work. I asked him casually, "What were you up to the other night?" My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. He didn't hesitate. "Oh, I was out with my coworkers," he said. "Had a few drinks, got a little drunk, and went straight home." His words came so easily, so convincingly. I just nodded and smiled, pretending to believe him. But inside, I knew the truth. He was lying. He had been with her. And that's when it hit me, Brian wasn't confused or careless. He had made a choice. To him, our relationship wasn't serious, not like I thought it was. I meant so little to him, and for the first time, I could see it clearly. Today, I decided to visit my grandfathers. I have 3 of them, 3 strong, wise men who stepped in to raise me when my mom passed away. They've always been there for me, guiding me, protecting me, and teaching me to stand tall even when life gets hard. As I sat with them, I poured out everything, the lies, the pain, the betrayal I felt. I didn't know what to expect, but my grandfather spoke with a calm strength that only he could have. He looked me in the eye and said, "Bring that boy here. Let your uncle handle it." His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. In that moment, I felt their love surround me, reminding me that I didn't have to face this alone. For the first time in days, I could breathe again.
Don't cry too much, Alma. You don't deserve to be treated like this. I'm angry, and I won't let this slide. We, your uncles, made a vow to protect you, to always be there when the world turns its back. And that's exactly what we'll do. No one gets to hurt you, not while we're here.
A few days later, I asked Brian to come with me to visit my grandfather. To my surprise, he agreed right away, saying he wanted to meet my family. I wasn't sure if he really cared or if it was just another way for him to smooth things over, but I needed him to see where I came from. We drove together in his car, the familiar hum of the engine filling the quiet. As we got farther out of the city, the buildings gave way to trees and open fields. The air felt different here, fresh, almost peaceful. My grandfather's house sat on the edge of town, surrounded by tall trees, a place that had always felt like home to me. I looked over at Brian, unsure of what he thought. I just hoped, for once, he'd understand what family meant to me. It had been almost an hour, and we still hadn't arrived. The road seemed endless, the trees on either side growing thicker, taller, like we were driving deeper into a forest. I could feel Brian's unease next to me. He glanced at me, then at the winding path ahead. Are we sure we're on the right road? He asked, his voice a little uncertain. I could hear the confusion in his tone, the unfamiliarity of the journey creeping in. I smiled a little, trying to reassure him, though I wasn't sure myself. We're almost there, I said, though the trees made it feel like we were lost in the middle of nowhere. But this was my grandfather's house, hidden away from the world, just like him. It always felt like a secret, a place untouched by time. Finally, we arrived. My grandfather's house stood there, nestled in the heart of the village, surrounded by towering trees that seemed to protect it from the outside world. There were no neighbors, no bustling streets, just quiet, nature, and the distant sound of birds. It felt like stepping back in time. A place where life moved slower, and you could breathe deeply without the weight of everything else. I watched Brian take it all in, his eyes scanning the house and the wide open space around it. For a moment, I wasn't sure if he could understand what this place meant to me. But I hoped, somehow, he would. Not long after, two figures appeared from behind the trees. Their faces were hidden by dark leather masks, a sight that used to calm me. I knew them immediately, my uncles. The ones who had always watched over me, who'd made sure I was safe and loved. I turned to Brian, my voice steady despite the storm inside. These are my uncles, I said. They love me. They hate seeing me sad, and they'll do anything to make me smile again. But then, I looked back at Brian, my heart aching with the truth I couldn't ignore. You've made me sad, Brian, I said quietly, the words cutting sharper than I expected. You lied to me. Then my uncle said. I turned to my uncles, my voice steady but with a quiet command. Go ahead, I said. Approach him. Let him talk. Let him laugh. For the first time, I saw it, fear. It flashed across Brian's face, the nervousness creeping in as he realized what kind of people my uncles were. They weren't just family. They were protectors, and in their presence, even someone as confident as Brian could feel small. As my uncles stepped closer, I watched Brian's posture stiffen, his gaze darting from one to the other. His usual easygoing demeanor was gone, replaced by uncertainty. And I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing he was starting to understand just how much I was worth. Before I could even react, Brian suddenly bolted. He ran as fast as he could, trying to escape my uncles, his footsteps pounding against the earth. It all happened so quickly, his fear had taken over, and in that moment, he wasn't the easygoing guy I once knew. He was just a man running from something he couldn't control. I stood there, watching him go, feeling a strange emptiness. I had hoped he would face the consequences of his lies, but seeing him like this, fleeing in fear, part of me didn't know whether to feel relieved or disappointed. My uncles were fast, too, closer than I expected. But when Brian reached the house and rushed inside, they stopped dead in their tracks. I watched from behind, unsure of what was about to happen. Then one of my uncles said something that sent a chill down my spine. Looks like he's chosen his way to die, he said, a dark chuckle escaping his lips. The other uncle laughed along, a cold, unsettling sound that made my stomach turn. I didn't know what they meant by it, but the way they spoke, so casually. I realized they weren't just threatening. They were capable of things I had never fully understood. I stood frozen, unsure of whether to follow or leave it all behind. That night, I drove home alone, the silence in the car heavier than ever. My uncles had cleaned everything up, leaving no trace of what happened. The car I had parked at Grandpa's days ago now carried me away, but not from the weight of it all. Some things you can't outrun. I finally reached the city, just minutes away from my house. As I drove through the quiet streets, a thought crossed my mind, and I couldn't help but ask you, have you ever watched Texas Chainsaw Massacre? Those men, they remind me of my grandfathers. Strong, quiet, and willing to do anything to protect me. So here's my message to all of you. Be careful with how you treat others, especially when it comes to breaking hearts. You never know who's watching, or what might happen to you.